always true.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Is that going to be?
Sean Penn, the man in the spotlight, firing up the crowds and demanding change.
Once and for all, let's break down the myths and destroy the lies and distortion.
His performances on screen have made him one of Hollywood's most respected actors, earning him 2 Oscars.
I did not expect this, but I want it to be very clear that I do know how hard I make it to appreciate me often.
Some certainly haven't appreciated his support for Venezuela's former president, Hugo Chavez, or his stance on the war in Iraq when he accused the Bush administration of criminal acts.
You, Mrs. Bush and Cheney, you, Ms. Rice, are villainously and criminally obscene people.
Sean Penn isn't afraid of controversy, of questioning those in power. And he knows his position in popular culture can benefit the causes he believes in. In Haiti, for example.
I think everybody that's spent time in Haiti knows how important it is that the world see what's going on here.
10 years ago, a society was launched in Pakistan to push for women's rights in tribal areas. In 2012, one of the group's co-founders, Farida Afridi, was killed on her way to work. And last year, a bomb went off in the organisation's head office. Opponents of women's rights wanted them silenced. They failed. Farida's sister, Nuzia, recently received the Frontline Defenders Award on behalf of the Pakistani organisation. Today on Talk to Al Jazeera, Sean Penn tells us about his current passions and the things that move him to act. Sean Penn, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera. I was wondering how you prefer to be known these days, as an actor or an activist?
It never occurs to me to differentiate anything that I do, you know, whether it's making coffee in the morning. I'm the coffee maker. I tend to live my life in flow, and I do whatever it is that I do.
You've just been at a ceremony honouring those people who are defenders of human rights. Their work is very far removed from, well, the industries that we're both involved in, which, as you know, can be quite superficial, quite wealthy at times, certainly very privileged. Is it hard to be a part of that industry and then watch, as I know you do, the injustices in the world?
I would like to take exception to that. In many cases, it's the people who have had, whether they come from poverty or privilege, they individually have had the opportunity, whether through education or through some additional sense of self. I mean, you see it, you know, with the many opportunities that Nelson Mandela had for his own personal freedom and didn't take it. With the great education of Martin Luther King, the things he sacrificed. To be in a room like the one today with people who, like they say, you know, it's the day-to-day things. Yes, the safety, security, education of your children, the shelter for your children, but your personal reputation being tarnished by people who are opposing you, and done in a way when there's no light on it. So while I would reject separating people based on socioeconomic class or nationhood, and would never want to underestimate the power of that courage in so many levels of the human family, the greatest inspirations and the ones who do finally face the greatest hardship are the poorest and those who are under threat of death and everything in between. So to see this organization to celebrate and support those people and to do follow-up support of those people is just a kind of undeniable grace, you know, and so I was really glad to be part of it.
When you speak, it's reported and people listen. Do you worry sometimes that you might speak about an issue that maybe you don't know enough about, you speak out about it, and then you regret it afterwards? Has that ever happened to you?
Probably. But less often than I've observed it in experts and in and in most of journalism. I feel that when I have spoken publicly, that typically it would be on something that I had first-hand witness of, and also maybe the luxury of the perspective from those of whom I'm speaking, who might not be ourselves. I come from a country that has about 25% passports, which means that 75% of the most powerful country in the world has never traveled outside of its own boundaries. And so they don't have a perspective. So I try very hard to maintain a dialogue within that which I know. I can be an emotional person, but I don't, and I can use some emotional words about what I'm talking about, but I haven't found myself doubling back often.
How do you choose those? Is it just something that you see on TV screens, or is it your approach? How do you go about picking which causes are the ones that you want to be involved in?
The credibility of those with whom you work and support or are supported by. Could start with that, and then you look into things. This Defenders program was a simple one, and really moving, because these people, I only have the tiniest kind of molecular connection to the sort of things that they've faced and what they do. So, but where it gets difficult is in dealing with nation-state support and political policy support, because there are so many agendas in those things, and it's very easy to find yourself believing in the initial development of a plan, and then seeing that through political pressures, those implementing it stray, and then you're attached to something that maybe isn't going so well. But I would rather make a mistake doing something than make the mistake of doing nothing.
In the past, have obviously been very critical about US foreign policy, particularly interfering in the affairs of other countries such as Iraq and Afghanistan. Is the US sometimes unfairly targeted by its critics, that it interferes in some countries, and then, for example, in Syria it made the decision not to go into Syria and was criticised for not doing so? Is the US expected to be the protector of people's freedoms, the protector of the innocent, but then gets criticised by all sides? I mean, how do you feel about that?
Look, I'm an American, and to engage in the culture of complaint about our own credibility failures is to have to acknowledge the part that we as citizens play and have failed our own government, not only the failure of the government toward us and toward the world. There are great successes to the US government. We saw an incredible response in Haiti, and an incredible response from the White House to the State Department to the Pentagon, and the people. And we've seen deviant interventions historically as well. But I think that we don't start to correct any of those things beginning with government. We have to get increasingly engaged in the policies and in the voting and the election of policymakers. And I think one of the big things where we have to recognize that we're complicit, and I'm only talking about the negatives here, is I think we've been far too comfort addicted, which has led us to be reluctant to boycott corporate interests that are lobbying these policies in Washington.
Such as?
Just as consumers, whether it be in energy, in food, and all those things that lead to food security issues around the world, that lead to environmental issues around the world. I think that and I think that the younger Americans are learning this at a faster rate than we did. And that as we get older and lazier, by the time we recognize our responsibility, will they recognize it when they're still ready to do something about it? I'm hopeful that way.
Is it that campaigning is changing as well for the younger generation? It's the internet generation, and for Americans, young Americans, they're learning far more about the world than previous generations ever knew, I guess.
Yeah, and you see, again, with the difficulty of the internet, to me, is that, again, in countries that have such a large level of comfort, as the United States still relatively does, the misuse of it, socially, politically, culturally, is so loud and so present for anyone paying attention that it only creates higher levels of mistrust and panic and paranoia, which is that thing that obscures hope and involvement, because you say, enough, it's too much. When you look at how the internet is used in cultures that do not have that comfort, it's one of these great, powerful things that takes an enormous amount of looking along, because it also creates very quick change, and quick change doesn't have a high sustainability rate in the short term. Egypt is a great example. I still believe very strongly in the Arab Spring. It's going to take a long time.
You were there in Tahrir Square.
Yeah.
You saw the hope, the euphoria, the excitement, which appears to have been completely dashed in that country now.
It certainly is dashed in terms of the perspective of the country's revolution from outside. I don't believe it's dashed in the young revolutionaries. And I think that they will see the triumph of it. But you got to have a few years to wait.
4 of Al Jazeera's journalists are actually detained in Egypt at the moment. They've been accused of terrorism offences as a worldwide campaign to get them released that's been joined by media organisations around the world. How important is freedom of the press to you? Because, of course, in some senses, you will get hounded by the so-called paparazzi and people that you don't want to be hounded by. But in general, the importance of the media today, what does it mean to you?
For many years, because I'd had a front row seat and a personal experience many, many times, still today, I see how irresponsible so much of journalism is, virtually making up lies. And I'm talking about including mainstream journalism. I've seen it in the New York Times. I've seen it in the Los Angeles Times. But where I really had firsthand witness, originally it was related, in my own case, it was related to things that really don't matter to anyone else.
So, what, personal things?
Or, celebrity-focused things and things like that. And I'm not somebody who believes that it's the price you pay and all of that. I think that's hokum. Do a job, if you want to see me in the movie theater. And so I would say that if you'd come to me before a significant change in this view, I would have said there should be some restriction on the press. And God knows, I think a self-respecting press will self-restrict in those areas. In the United States, so much of the press, not all, is not self-respecting, and so you're constant. It creates a kind of diseased culture, especially the celebrity aspect of it, and the political coverage. But when I went to Iran in the week that led to the election of Ahmadinejad, and I saw the restriction on the press, and people like the people that were awarded today, risking their lives, I thought, the only way to protect the press is that the press has absolute freedom, and if they abuse it, shame on them. But we have to have that, and then we have to boycott stupid magazines. Just don't buy it. When they talk about privacy in the United States, I have an attitude of you want privacy? Don't buy the magazines that talk about my life. They've got it on their laps while they talk about their need for privacy. No, I think the press needs to have absolute freedom, and the whole culture, including the press, has to learn to respect itself and each other more.
It's interesting you talk about privacy, because earlier we were talking about US foreign policy, and actually recently the US has been criticised more for its surveillance programs, its spying on people, if you like. What are your thoughts on the National Security Agency and people like Edward Snowden? I mean, do you have a view on that?
Like in many things, the whistleblower policies need to be very strong and clear. And again, a lot of it has to do with not only public policy, but the public's awareness and understanding of that policy and the ways in which we accept certain investigatory tactics to be able to protect us. When it was Daniel Ellsberg and the Pentagon Papers, you look back at that case and you see somebody who was the individual responsible curator of the information that he was dispersing. And that type of a whistleblower needs to be protected. He's offered the responsibility and taken the responsibility. Edward Snowden, in my view, may have been very well intended. Without question, there will be some very good things that come of the information that was released. And there was some criminal activity going on in our government. I wasn't shocked by that. And there were things that were systemically criminal. And I don't think anyone in government was shocked by that. But I don't think it's responsible to do as Snowden did. I don't approve of the way in which the WikiLeaks was randomly blitzed. There are communiques between governments and internally in governments that are meant to mislead and will never, and they're taken literally. There are sensitive relationships that are going to save lives tomorrow that got decimated by that. You have to be if you're going to do it, you have to believe it. And I think he believed it. I don't know. I think he believed it. But like anything else, it's where there's not the capacity, and he's certainly, bright as he is, did not have the individual capacity to have scrutinized all that material and the nuances in each case. And I would say that if you're going to celebrate Edward Snowden, you have to celebrate that the kind of diplomatic relationships that in many cases were slaughtered led to the death of innocent people and will. How do you balance that? It's a very difficult one, because at the same time, how else were we going to find out? I'm not going to be a final judge on that, but I'm going to be a pursuer of my own organizational thought about it as we go along, and what we as citizens have to do to be able to hold our governments accountable and determine what our mutual aspirations are in terms of security versus privacy and secrecy.
You're a very staunch defender of human rights, and some people have questioned about your friendship with the late Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez and why you would be so interested in a country like Venezuela, which is considered one of the most corrupt in the world. Talk to me about your relationship with Venezuela, and particularly Hugo Chavez and his successor, Nicolas Maduro. What is it you see in them that you admire?
I've never been able to come to terms with either socialism or capitalism as functional systems.
Neither?
Neither. The humility of many of the progressive socialist governments to acknowledge it as the socialist experiment seems to this layman as a very practical acknowledgement, because we see how capitalist systems are failing. We see how the socialist systems are dysfunctional. We know that people, that dreaming isn't a luxury, it's a human need, and hence capitalism feeds into the possibility of that dream and the entrepreneurship, that all of those discussions. But beginning with the beginning of President Chavez in Venezuela, it was a country that had 80% of its people hadn't begun to have the right to dream. They didn't exist. They had no identity, and I mean literally had no identity cards. They didn't exist, and they were ignored by the elite. So when the elite didn't do something for their people, it gave rise to someone like Chavez. Chavez was an electric personality. He was a great friend of mine. That's a personal note. He was significantly important and necessary in Venezuela. His personal flamboyance, sometimes I said to him, don't put your arm around this guy. You shake his hand, we understand, and there is that feeling, and there's been that long history of bad history the United States had in intervention in South America. And when you're talking to an uneducated mass that you're trying to educate, that you're getting incredible medical care for the first time in their lives, getting their kids into school, and you're needing to appeal politically, I guess there is that instinct to say things against the bad guy, the big bad wolf. Nicolas Maduro, President Maduro, inherited a lot of the growing pains that were left and the problems that came of a country largely forced into paranoia, largely forced into certain relationships that maybe are distasteful. At the same time, I think there's a great chance that he is a former Minister of Foreign Affairs who had a great reputation that way, who I had a personal engagement with on a particular project and found him to be more than competent, highly competent, very bright. And similar to Chavez, very in love with his people and his country.
But not all the people in his country are in love with him. We've seen the demonstrations, haven't we, there?
This is to be very careful about.
Yeah.
Are they demonstrating in Venezuela over oppression? Or are they demonstrating because they're on economic hard times? It's the latter. That's what it is. We're all on economic hard times.
But is it just economic hard times, though? Is it also human rights as well?
Well, human rights. Go on Human Rights Watch. Go on Amnesty International's site. While Hugo Chavez was being called a dictator after 14 legitimate elections as a democratically elected president, more than any of our leaders have ever had to go through, our friend was Colombia. Death squads, political prisoners, minimal accusations of that in Venezuela. I've been to Venezuela many, many times. I believe that, the frustrations are real. But they are frustrations of an identity up against, we see it on an economic level with President Obama in the United States, how quickly we forget the devastated economy he inherited, the devastated credibility of his country he inherited. We've got to include in the context of our view of Venezuela the incredibly biased reporting that certainly, and again, I'm talking so much from the perspective of following principally U.S. media, but on Venezuela, I think we should really be careful. We, the United States, should really be careful and remember, we put $11 billion a year into Pakistan. Pakistan is not our friend. We're worried, of course, they're nuclear, and so on. I don't love that. But man, for every step we take forward is a step back. That money is corrupted all over the place. You want to talk about a place that we got problems with, it's Pakistan. But when it comes to something like Venezuela, these problems can, most of it has to do, I think, with a lack of communication and paranoia on both sides. But I am hopeful, although when people are comparing it to the Ukraine, I just think, I hope the governments aren't listening. And I don't think they are. The realists that are involved in it, the people I talk to in terms of U.S.-Venezuela relationship, I think there's a great possibility, not necessarily of friendship, but of a growing civility. And the world economy is going to demand of socialist countries and of capitalist countries a lot of adjustment. And we'll see where it goes.
You were once known as, dare I say, the angry man of acting. I think you even went to management classes to control anger. Are you a different man now? Do you think age has mellowed you, that you're less angry, or you show it less? Or are you just as frustrated?
I think I cause more anger than I have. Let's be clear, I never voluntarily went or accused myself of having the issues that would lead one to anger management.
No, you were told to go.
To tell me to go. And in all cases, the therapists rejected me, saying I didn't have those issues, so I leave it to the professionals.
I was just wondering whether you feel that you accept things more maybe now.
I don't know. I think any American male is going to, romanticize an accusation on them of being an angry person. So I don't want to indulge that. It's really not my description. So,
Sean Penn, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera. Thank you very much indeed.